The league did yesterday. So Fred VanVleet, and let's go back. VanVleet was fined $30,000 by the league yesterday for his profanity-laced criticism of the official Ben Taylor that came after a loss to the Clippers on Wednesday night, in which VanVleet was teed up. If you didn't hear it, this is what he said.
I don't mind. I'll take a fine. I don't really care. I thought, Ben Taylor was terrible tonight. I thought that on most nights, a couple of the, out of the three, there's one or two that just the game up. Tonight, you're competing pretty hard. The third quarter, I get a tech, changes the whole dynamic of the game, changes the whole flow of the game. And, most of the refs are trying hard. I like a lot of the refs are trying hard. They're pretty fair. They communicate well. And then you got the other ones who just want to be and just kind of the game up. Nobody's coming to see that. They come to see the players. And I think we're losing a little bit of the fabric of what the NBA is and was. And it's been disappointing this season. You could look up most of my texts this year have been with Ben Taylor officiating. So at a certain point as a player, you feel it's personal.
Holy smoke, right? I've been covering the league since the early 90s. That's about the strongest direct criticism I've ever heard from a player. They only fined him $30,000. The maximum is $50,000. We were kicking around yesterday whether he might get suspended for what he said, and I think that he can't based upon the collective bargaining agreement. But, Windy, I'll start with you. What was your reaction to the league making the decision it made yesterday?
They just gave a green light to have anybody who wants to do it keep doing it. I mean, earlier this season, Ja Morant and Marcus Smart were both fined more than this for cursing out referees on the floor. At least that's heat of the moment. Yeah, it's worth $35,000. This was completely premeditated, and he called the official out by name, which, sort of creates a whole other tension going forward. And the NBA kind of just shrugged and treated it as if they would treat a guy skipping a mouthpiece into the stands like Steph Curry did earlier this year when he got $25,000 fine. I mean, generally, the league has gotten much softer on fines. It used to be, by the way, if you not that I'm a shrinking violet, but it used to be if you cursed in a post-game press conference, that would sometimes get you fined. Now, you can directly call out an official by name and curse at him, and your fine is really negligible. I bet Fred VanVleet was cackling how small this fine was. He was prepared to pay much more. He announced he was prepared to pay much more, basically.
What do you think, Big Perk?
Well, let me say this, okay? First of all, $30,000 is a lot of lettuce, okay? Make no mistake about it. But it also is based on, right, Fred VanVleet and who his character is, right? That's how you judge sometimes when you get fined and whether you go into the league office. Now, as a guy that actually led the league in technical fouls for about 2 or 3 years, a guy that didn't have the best relationship with the referees, a guy that stayed getting into verbal altercations with officials, here's the thing that we have to ask ourselves. What pissed Fred VanVleet off that bad that he premeditated to come on and direct those comments at that particular referee? And sometimes officials not only have a bad night of calling calls, but they have this sense of arrogancy and this sense of this attitude that I don't want to talk to you. And they have this where you know better not to talk to him because he be tripping. And I think Fred VanVleet was tired of every time that this specific official was refereeing the game, it's the communication part where you can't even talk to this dude.
It is the most direct criticism I've ever heard in the 30 years I've been covering the league by a player of a particular official. And again, he was fined only $30,000. And to a normal person, that sounds like a lot of money. But the reality is that's just barely above the minimum that they fine in these circumstances, and it's well below the maximum. So when we played that for you earlier, we had a good conversation with Windy and with Big Perk. And when I came back to the table, D. Wood was incredulous. And he wanted to jump in. And we wanted Harry in the conversation, too, to remind you his brother played in the NBA. So we have a lot of perspective here. Point of the history between the two of them, there is some. VanVleet has 8 technicals. 3 of them were handed to him by that specific official, and a fourth of those 8 came in a game that the official himself, Ben Taylor, was also officiating, but came from a different referee. We have Big Perk back. Go ahead, big fella.
So what happens with the history of the league, with the history of a player and officiating, Greeny, behind the scenes is that this player may go and complain to their team, their organization, and the organization may send it to the league and say, hey, what's going on with this particular player and this official? So my thing is that why Fred VanVleet was so annoyed when he went up there, why was this premeditated? It's because of the history. And it also comes down to the character and the history of that player when it comes down to being fined. Like me, I know every time after I developed a reputation, I was going to get fined more than a guy that didn't have a reputation of being, getting into it with officials or getting technical fouls. It's just part of it. It's part of it.
Okay, so that is your perspective, and you are certainly welcome to it. Wendy, you've covered the league a long time. What was your take?
Yeah, I don't know if Perk should be allowed on this panel because he's obviously going to take the side of the complaining player because he was a complaining player for 15 years. They gotta have the regardless of the issue and how the referee is treating the player. Even if all those technicals were not smart, even if that referee has an issue with the player, the NBA's got to back up its referees. And so, Greeny, a minute ago you called this a rant. It actually wasn't a rant. A rant is what happens when a guy's emotional and angry. Fred VanVleet went in there and was like, I'm going to put this ref on Front Street. I'm going to call him out. I'm going to put him in a corner. And the NBA kind of shrugged. If I were Fred VanVleet, in fact, if I was another player, I would start to prepare a list. I was like, well, if it's going to cost me $30,000 and that's all it's going to cost, and I can personally insult a referee's performance and now apply pressure on that referee forevermore when he referees my games, it's a good trade-off. And that's really where the league has been going in recent years. The fines have been getting lighter and lighter. The abuse from the officials is being more and more allowed. And I'm not saying it has anything to do with the officials' performance. I agree we're not at the peak of performance in referees, but we are at the peak of the league office basically letting the players run wild on just about whatever they want. And this is another example.
Okay, so Big Perk might actually get a technical for what he's going to say to you in a minute here, Whitney. But let me get the other guys in quickly because, I remind everyone, Harry Douglas's brother Tony played in the NBA. Go ahead, Harry.
Yeah, I'm not going to sit up here and promote it, but at some point, when are we going to hold the officials accountable? You know what I mean? And for Fred VanVleet, I like the fact that he stood on it and he sent the direct message because at some point, when are the refs going to be held accountable for their actions? For some reason, we want to sit there and hide everything that they do under the table.
They're held accountable.
I mean, Wendy.
They have something now, Harry, which they didn't have. They haven't had full. They have a 2-minute report. At the end of every game, the league announces all the mistakes the officials made at the end of games. I mean, like, go ahead, Big Perk. Why is that so upsetting?
But Greeny, it's not about the 2-minute report. It's not about what happens in the blown calls that they miss. It's about being able to control your emotions as an official and let guys show passion. Like that's why you have a select group that referee the NBA Finals because they earned the right. That's why they have a playoff roster when it comes down to officiating that's going to make the playoffs. But here's the thing, like certain teams probably don't want certain officials when they have to match up in the playoff series because they do feel like it's something personal. Although it might not be, it feels that way. And so if a guy's not able to go out there and play the game that he loves with passion, play it with tenacity, be in the moment without worrying about if he has to deal with official, that's hard to do. Like you want to go out there and be the best version of yourself and not worry about a personal beef that you have with an official.
That part of it I do get, obviously. D. Wood, final word.
Yeah, listen, I know it could be different from sport to sport, but I know like in football, you get one opportunity a week to go out there and put it all on the line And you know, we've seen it time and time again where, you know, official will interject themselves in critical moments in the game that could be deciding factors in a game. And I always know we always talk about, we use the cliche, there are many plays in the game that determine the outcome of the game. Yeah, that sounds great, but, you know, those type of things happen. What tends to happen is after the game, you're emotional about it, but now we all of a sudden got to curtail ourselves. We got to contain ourselves from talking about the issue that clearly everyone is talking about as far as officiating concerned. So, listen, I get what Fred VanVleet is talking about, where you're just, you know, it comes to a boiling point. You want to unleash, and I just think that we expect so much of players to just keep their emotions under control in an emotional game. I just don't think that's right.
So, note to self, the players are never going to be on the side of the officials. That's just not what's going to happen. I think we have learned that here,
but
one way or the other.
But
Greeny, final word, really quick.
Greeny, one more thing.
Go ahead.
One thing. We just witnessed it last week when the Denver Nuggets and the Toronto Raptors were in a close game, and we saw Scotty Barnes get thrown out of the game by Scott Foster. We just witnessed that moment. Like, it's passion. What you think is going to happen?
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.